Hi, and welcome to the Brohoyo podcast, the podcast about gacha in general and Hoyoverse games in specific. I'm your host, Steven, and this is my co host, David.
Hey everyone.
And this week we're going to be discussing Hoyoverse's most recent release, Z. So, you know what, Dave? Why don't you start us off with your first impressions of ZZZ? Zenless Zone
So
Zero. Sorry, I guess I should
yeah,
have
I
said
was
the
gonna
full
say for
title.
Zenless Zone Zero and then acronyms, right? ZZZ,
Yeah.
as we'll be referring to it for the rest of the show. So initial impressions, first impressions I noticed when we're loading and getting started is it pops. Like it's just very has a very different vibe than Genshin or Star Rail in and then rebuilding, Sixth Street, kind of given that I think in our Let's Play we mentioned Persona vibes, right? It was very much like felt like we were walking around Shinjuku type thing in Persona, and going to the ramen shop, the coffee shop, your video store, and all these other things. So that first gaze at it to me, it was really coming alive. It really just with bright colors, flash, and then the game ran really smooth. That was the other thing, first impression wise as well. It just ran real smooth. Performance wise, didn't have any issues with the launch.
Hmm.
And I know even with the pre-install stuff and then the stuff that you install on actual launch day, launch night, yeah, like buttery smooth performance in that regards. As far as the first impressions, the gameplay, combat, it's very fluid as far as switching between characters and the different like combinations and perfect dodging or perfect countering stuff like that. And it's again it's very flashy. I'm gonna we'll dive deeper into our thoughts on combat and some other things, but just again for first impressions, very flashy. The story was interesting enough. All these different groups and organizations that you're learning of and who's in and what they're doing, and I'm sure more will be unveiled as we dive into the story. The Hoyoverse sticking with twins again, but this time we don't have amnesia necessarily, and our twins are actually together. So I don't know what it is with Hoyoverse and twins, but there we go. So intrigued by the story, nothing I would say groundbreaking in terms of video game or anime tropes, but still interesting to see where they take it down the path. But those were kind of the first impressions with that. What about Steve for you? Your first impressions booting it up and diving right in. What'd you think?
Again, it oozes style. I will definitely give the game that. It has a tone and a style, and it sticks for the most part to it. I would also say that, again, from a just basic technical standpoint, it played fine. There might have been some issues if you were watching the video that we put up last. It would have been not last Thursday, but the Thursday before. That if there were any hiccups or so forth, that was more from my system's end and the recording side. Game played smooth, didn't have any issues. You could definitely feel the money on the screen, that you could tell that it was a solid production, that they put work into it. Again, don't want to go too deep into gameplay or anything like that, but it seemed competently put together for the most part. Now that I'm a little bit further on, I overall get the system. Again, something that we'll circle back to. But yeah, I think as it, similar to Wuthering Waves, the first 2 hours that we played had me optimistic. It definitely left me with a sense of, yeah, this might make it into my rota, my daily game play. There were still a lot of questions, some of which have been answered for me, some of which still are yet to remain to be answered. But for the most part, I think that it left a very solid first impression for me.
Now, you talk about potentially working its way into your rotation. So we talk about first impressions, and then now having played a little bit more, I want to dive into where we both stand currently on the game, and then maybe we can dive deeper into things like story or the gameplay aspect, stuff like that. I will say I've gotten to play a little bit of the game, not as much as I wanted to due to some extenuating circumstances
Hmm.
with hurricanes and loss of power for multiple days. So I'm not going to be able to go into maybe as as further into the story as you did, Steve. But I want to get your perspective first, since you did play a little bit more. Where do you stand with the game right now? Because as it made its way in your rotation, I guess that'll be the conclusion for you. But where do you stand currently?
Well, like every good high school paper, I'm going to start with my conclusion, my thesis. which is that yes, so far it is remaining in my rotation. I do play it daily. I've made it. I am. It's not adventure level in this game. It's intranet level. I'm intranet level 30, so I've basically completed all of the starter stuff. I've gotten the full starter pack pulls. I'm fully through that. I'm in the start of chapter 3. So I've completed chapter 1 intermission, chapter 2 intermission, and now I'm on 3. And I'm only very slightly dipped my toe into 3. I've met a couple characters and that's about it. I will say that at least at the moment, it's walking a line for me. It's not quite hit the point to where I'm going to drop it. It hasn't hit Wuthering Waves level of, okay, I think I'm done with this. But it is running up against some of the problems I had with Wuthering Waves. Primarily that there's a lot of, as much as I enjoy the combat, and I will give ZZZ the tip of the hat, I guess, or I will say that one of the things they did right is that I do feel like they focused the gameplay portions on the combat for the most part. I know that there's some talk about the TV sections, and again, we can loop back to that. But at least from my experience, it's not distracted by the open world in the same way that Wuthering Waves is. I think instead it's distracted by something that is kind of frustrating in its own right, which is Persona. It really does feel like Persona, and there's this sort of grafted on time of day, day of the week system onto the game where, for those of you out there who might not have ever played the Persona series, the the way that the Persona series works is that you basically are working through a Japanese school year, and you have specific time slots that you have to optimize and do things in. So, during the day you might have to go to you go to school because your character's a high school student, but in the evening, you have to decide, okay, am I going to go and talk with this person or that person? Am I going to go into the dungeon and level up or try and push the story forward? And a lot of it's about opportunity cost. You have to manage opportunity cost. Whereas in ZZZ, that opportunity cost doesn't exist because they can't lock you in the way that, you know, Persona can. Like in Persona, you are working through a school year. It is only September 1st one time in that game. Once you're done with that day, it becomes September 2nd, and you have to get everything done by what was it, December, I think. I can't remember the exact school year cycle of Japan, and they sometimes add months in the expanded version. But the long and the short is you only have a very limited amount of time, whereas you know ZZZ is going to go endlessly, and they can't just go like, hey, it's 8 o'clock in the morning your time. You can only do one thing in this, and then you have to log back in later in order to do it in the afternoon. Like that's not that's cripplingly tight. So they have this kind of grafted on, and it just doesn't quite blend well. There's this odd sort of mixture that it doesn't quite work for me. I like each of these individual flavors. It should be peanut butter and chocolate, but instead I'm getting like peppermint and banana, or it's just like I don't know, these don't work together, or they're not quite working together for me at the moment. I think the other problem is that I've kind of gotten so used to the Hoyoverse style game systems that even as they're being added in, I recognize them, but they've been tweaked just enough that I'm running up against some of the quality of life improvements that have come in from stuff like Honkai and even Genshin. Not that Genshin is necessarily fully caught up with Honkai and quality of life, but I would have liked for ZZZ to have been another step forward on that, and I feel like in some cases it's a step back. And that's all a very kind of long rant. I do want to give it back over to you, Dave. I know that you might not have been able to get in recently because, as you mentioned, there's power outages and so forth. But
Yeah.
sort of where are you sitting?
So you touched on a few things that I did notice, and I was going to mention, yeah, with the time of day system that kind of expand on what you're saying. Yeah, it doesn't make sense in a game like this because in the Persona franchise, like you said, there is a finite end to the school year. There's a finite end to the game because it's a game you play through the story, ultimately through to its conclusion. Gotcha games are not that. Gotcha games, the idea is to keep you playing every day. Like that's the idea, is to log in, get you playing every day, and kind of, there's the FOMO aspect on various events and such like that, or getting your dailies done, getting your weeklies done, accruing currency, et cetera, et cetera. So the fact that they differentiate the day and assign certain quests to certain times a day, and then artificially tell you to take a pause and have your character go sleep, it's unnecessary. I know there's always the joke of, well, when do characters go to the bathroom? When do the characters sleep? It's like it's the joke. We don't actually need you to implement it into the game. We understand that it's a game. So that's a fair point. As far as a kind of a silly mechanic or a frustrating mechanic maybe for some. And I kind of want to start in terms of what I experienced with in the positive, and then maybe I'll get to some of my quote gripes as they were. And again, these are my personal opinions, my personal tastes on things. Something I may like, you guys may not like, or something I may not like, you guys may love. I don't know. So, but in terms of the game itself, like I mentioned, the combat, I do enjoy the combat and the switching out of characters with the perfect dodges and the perfect combos. I really enjoy that aspect of it. I think it's an element of an action RPG that increases the skill ceiling. But being a Hoyoverse game, they've found a healthy balance of combat for casuals, and you can still get through things, but you're not going to, you know, S rank them or 3-star rank them. You'll get through it, but maybe you get an A rank or you get the 2 out of 3 stars type things, right? If you're able to get better or master those little tweaks and those little gimmick things that they've included, that's when you're really going to see that maximization, getting that S rank stuff. And I imagine as we get more challenging content, as we get further into the game, we may see that skill ceiling get raised a little bit to really differentiate those. So I don't personally mind that. I find part of that kind of enjoyable in terms of trying to master the game, but I do also understand that some people may not like that, and so they like the quote unquote the Genshin casual approach that allows a wider net of players to play and enjoy it, and not feel as pressured to get quote unquote sweaty with the skill gap.
Yeah, and just to jump in
Um,
here real
mhm.
quick, I do agree with you. I do really enjoy the combat system, and I am not saying that this is what they are going to do, but a concern I do have is HP bloat.
Yeah,
Because
just everything getting progressively spongier and spongier, soaking up more bullet sponge, as it
yeah,
were, bullet sponges.
because I will admit I ran into a little bit of that. Now, part of that is because I'm in the early mid game where you're not fully equipped, you're not fully loaded for bear. I imagine that will drop off, but I will admit there are a couple fights that I'm sitting there going like I've functionally beat this. The only thing that I'm trying, the only thing that's preventing me from finishing this fight is my damage output potential, which is tied to gear, and the fact that I'm being timed on it is actually a little bit annoying because skill wise I've already beaten this boss. I'm just
Hmm.
hitting it for half the damage I could potentially be hitting it because I haven't grinded for not artifacts yet. But again, passing it over to you real quick. Or again.
Yeah, and you kind of bring up another thing I wanted to talk about, and so I'm going to go out of order in my points a
Oh,
little bit. When you
sorry.
talk about things being at bullet, no, it's fine because it's good that I'm not the only one that's. It makes me feel less crazy, not crazy. Being the operative qualifier there. But yeah, when you talk about your concern for enemies getting more bullet spongy and just being larger HP bars, one of the things I did notice with the combat, and something that was maybe a little bit of a complaint that I have, is it didn't matter what type of enemy I was fighting, they all kind of feel the same. And I know there's obviously some different character design or enemy designs, and there's a couple of different mechanics, but it all feels samey, like
Mhm.
samey-ish. And it ultimately just came down to auto attacking, and then like combat or comboing in with your team and your bang boos once you unlock those.
Mhm.
Now this may change again because I'm in a little bit earlier of the stages than you, but I think for context, for story, I think I got to, I think it's right after the first intermission, and you unlock the equivalent of the simulated universe.
Mhm. Okay.
Like
Yeah,
it's
you're
just
still in
just kind of
yeah, intermission
just
1.
yeah, so just kind of Honkai Star Rail analogy it for those that play Star Rail and maybe haven't tried ZZZ. So it's still relatively early in the game. Now that being said, to kind of go back into what some things I wanted to talk about. So the game did feel very handholdy in the tutorial and the prologue,
Hmm.
which as a veteran Hoyoverse player, like I don't need that so much anymore. Like I can understand, just show me the terminology and I can kind of figure it out all out on my own type stuff. But something that I didn't like was I get my characters to level 20, which is the first like break point,
Hmm.
or max level that you can get to. And then I'm looking to see, okay, when am I able to do my world level up quest or my world ascension quest? Because again, being a Hoyoverse veteran, we know that that's ultimately what's going to happen. You're going to raise your traveler level, or like Steve mentioned in ZZZ, it's your inner not level, or your internet level, as it were. And so I see on the internet level, you get to level 25 of your internaut, and that's when you will be able to elevate the world to the next level. Well, no, there's actually an ascension challenge that you have to do, and you don't just unlock the challenge by hitting 25. You have to then push the story to a certain point to get that,
Hmm.
which was a little bit annoying because I hit max level stuff in that well before. Like I still had to play another hour and a half, 2 hours before I could ascend the level. So I'm sitting here not making the most efficient use of my whatever it's called in this game, my resin equivalent.
Hmm.
Characters are max level. And while it is typical in Hoyoverse games, you're not artifact farming until you can get guaranteed orange level artifacts. The fact that that concept, I think they're data discs in
Hmm.
this game, is what they're called, maybe. The fact that those are just now being introduced, and I am probably 5+ hours into the game when artifacts in Genshin are introduced really early, and also in Star Rail. I would say they are
I actually have
much
to
earlier.
correct you on two of those, unfortunately.
Okay,
Sorry.
this may be recency bias, but yeah. So when is it introduced in those other games? Where am I wrong on this?
So, first thing I'd say is that in at least Honkai, because I'm most familiar with that because I had to replay it for the background images, background visuals for the podcast. You are limited based off of story on when you can level up. It's just that typically in Honkai, the story actually powers you up so much through it that you don't really notice the fact that you have to hit certain breakpoints in the story. The only reason I noticed is because I would take long pauses between recordings where I was just doing dailies and wasn't pushing the main story. So I'd end up hitting the same issue that you did where I'm maxed out, but I can't continue until I actually finish. So that is in Honkai. It's just that because of the way that they built that curve, you don't notice it if you're playing through it naturally. I was just playing it in a borked way and ran into that. The other is that you don't run into relics or into they're relics in Honkai, right? Or are they?
Yeah, relics. Yeah,
Yeah, it's not
relics and
artifacts.
Genshin in his artifacts. Yeah,
Genshin's
yeah.
artifact. So you don't run into that system until near the end of Belobog, because it's not until you get to the run up to Cocolia that you actually unlock that. Again, we just ran into it super fast because we binged that game the first night and we
Okay.
rushed through it.
So to the point in the story, what you're talking about, yeah, I can probably can see my memory on the Star Rail when the World Ascension was there, but you reached it more naturally to kind of what I think you were. Is that maybe what you were saying? Is we reached it naturally in Star Rail because the story
Yeah,
put us to that level, whereas in ZZZ it had you do some of these other things that boosted your internet level ahead of maybe where you were story wise, and so I hit that threshold before the story. Am I understanding? Is that kind of what you were getting at?
basically, yeah. That
Okay.
with the that I think part of what you're experiencing is the fact that I feel that the curve in the power curve, the leveling curve in ZZZ is a little bit wonky, where it feels like you get boosted up really high and then it levels off. And I guess we're getting into sort of my some of my later concerns with gameplay is that you get boosted up really high and then it sort of starts leveling off. And so what ends up happening is you get these weird starts and stops where you're not it doesn't feel like you're flowing through the story naturally and kind of progressing naturally. It feels like you're hitting these intermission stages which are sort of hard drops into I guess tonally they're trying to go for like daily life stuff, and then you go back into the story, and it powers you through, and then you get dropped again. And you're actually very close to running into relics based off of where you've mentioned you are in the story, but because of the way that it kind of pushes you through, and then you get into these doldrums, it doesn't feel quite right. Like, because again, in Honkai,
Yeah, it's
you don't run into relics until you're almost done with the second act, and that's actually I'm going to say roughly around the same place that you will run into them in ZZZ. It's just that you don't have that same. It doesn't feel like the story's pushing you through in the same way that I think Honkai does.
well, I guess I just for me for the relics or in Star Rail or in
Mhm.
Genshin, like I felt like you were getting those as maybe quest rewards. Yes, they were the gray or green variants. They were very low level stuffs, but you were getting them. The fact and
I think in Genshin you get them way quicker. Again, it's been forever. It's been 2 years, three
But
years
yeah, and
since then.
that's
So
and part of this, yeah, may be some memory and potentially conflating things or misremembering things. But even to the point, the fact that we could reach that stage in one night of the day one Honkai Star Rail launch, we reached that point. Whereas in ZZZ, I
we
feel
also
like
played until 4 in the morning. But yeah, I get where you're going. I'm not to undermine it, but I get where you're going. Yeah.
it just felt like forever to get to that point, and it was already felt to me like I was dragging on getting our progression stuff
To
because they're
be
having you do all these other things.
Yeah, and just to be clear, I don't disagree with your basic point, which is that it feels like progression in ZZZ is a little bit off kilter. It doesn't, at least for me, it doesn't feel like that smooth process that I felt in Genshin or that I felt in Honkai. And I don't, and at least personally, I don't know if part of that is because because the gameplay feels like it should be skill based, but there's all this back end math equipment ARPG stuff that maybe that's where I'm running into an issue on my own side where it doesn't feel like that blends. I feel like,
Mm.
well, if I'm playing the game, the supposedly more skill heavy game better, then why is it that I don't feel as powerful because I'm not doing the math side of it of getting the artifacts, getting they're not light cones, they're orbs or whatever in ZZZ. You know, leveling talents in it is awkward as hell because it doesn't feel like you should need to level them because it's skill based.
And I guess kind of yeah, I mean to kind of go on back to again just kind of like my current impressions
Mhm.
on things. And I know we've kind of segued in a couple other
Yeah.
topics and dove a little deeper. So as far as my current impression of the game, like I said, we talked about kind of how I felt in terms of some things dragging or the story, combat, and the TV screen aspect of the game, just making it all seem very disjointed. Like it's trying to do a bunch of different things and it does all of them like pretty well or okay, but it's not like it's standing out in any one particular area of being great. That's kind of where I feel on that. But being a Hoyoverse product, it's very polished and it is, you know, well done, but it's just, again, it's just nothing's like, oh my gosh, this is standing out as being fantastic. As far as like being in my rotation, it is in my daily or it would be in my daily rotation had I had power these past couple days. But so it's still something I'm going to be playing and trying out. I haven't pulled on the premium banners yet. I've just been pulling standard banner stuff whenever we get 10 pulls. I'm not using any of my premium currency.
Mhm.
And then the Bang Boo banner. Ironically enough, my first 10 pull on a Bang Boo banner, I got two of the S ranks, which is the Bang Boo
Mhm.
percentage is a little bit better than a S rank character or weapon because its character or weapon is 0.6%, but I think a
Mhm.
Bang Boo is 1%. So I got two in 110 pull, so felt
Nice.
pretty good about that. So yeah, so as far as my current impressions, where I stand with it now, again, yeah, it's in the rotation. I'm gonna keep giving it a go. If you're asking me to rank it amongst Genshin and Star Rail, it would be a clear third to me. Like it's that could be a discussion for another day in terms of
Mhm.
how I order Star Honkai and how I order Genshin. But third, it's like those two and then some space and then like a clear this. If I played Honkai Impact the third, I don't know where that would necessarily fall. I didn't play that game long enough to really have a full developed opinion on it
Mhm.
in the rankings. But of the big three Genshin releases that we've had in the last 4 years, this one is going to be third for me.
Yeah, I think I agree with that assessment that it's a fairly solid third for me as well. But having said that, I do want to get in a little bit into the some of the gameplay aspects of ZZZ. I
Mhm.
know that we've touched on it in multiple ways, but some stuff that I wanted to just talk about. Also, some clarity that or some things that needed clarity on my end that I only found out in the past couple days that maybe I didn't know if you were aware of or not, Dave. So I'm just going to go
Okay.
through some quick stuff, and if you've heard of it, let me know. If not, have you unlocked the coffee shop yet, Dave?
Yes, I did unlock the coffee shop.
Cool. Did you read the tooltip better than I did and find out that, hey, there's a daily rota where you can get one bonus of one of the basically calyxes or ley line
I
things?
I I I did read,
Okay.
yes.
So you're better than I am because I spent about a good solid 4 or 5 days not reading that and not realizing that by choosing just the basic option,
You were missing
I
out on
was
some
missing
bonus
out on some stuff.
drops. Yeah, I am running a shock team, so I was drinking the shock boosting coffee.
All right. Good to know. Also, that is something that I feel like the game doesn't do a great job of explaining, which is how elements work in the game and like how they function as part of combat and actually how important they can be. Because I can tell you right now, based on like where I'm at in the story, I'm hitting the point where they are asking for specific elements in order to fight certain bosses because they will have shields that only get weakened if you are fighting them with a ice element type or a fire element type or a
Well,
ether
that's not
element
good
type.
for my mono shock team because that's what I'm currently running because that's what the game has given me in
Yeah,
my
it
standard
is
builds.
beatable because I've done it. I was able to barge my way through with a fire type team, but basically it means that you have to stun the enemy once in order to start actually doing damage because until then it has a shield. Like you can do it, you just have to brute force it.
It's not something I like the sound of because that's going to make the impetus on building all these characters. Which yes, we're going to ultimately, as the roster gets larger, build more and more characters.
Mhm.
But at on the early stages, again, like for somebody like me, I can only play what's been given to me in terms of characters. And so imagine just having whatever situation on an account where you don't have a large variety of you don't have like a
Mhm.
fire DPS type unit, let's say, right? Maybe your fire person is just the support. That's a small concern, but I don't think it's going to be as big of an issue as it is in my head right now because I haven't actually seen it so much to experience it. I think the only shield I've experienced has been in like a tutorial type fight, and it
Mhm.
was a shock shield, and I have a shock team, so it's not that big of a deal.
Yeah, having played through it, it's not become an issue yet. Let me put it that way. I'm still able to proceed. I'm still able to clear content. It means that in some cases I'm getting A rank instead of S rank on something because I just can't muscle through. Like I have to brute force it, and that's
Mhm.
not an option. Again with intranaut level caps, there's a limit on what you can brute force. So maybe there will be some cycling back when I'm max level and just destroying things, but we will see. Another thing I do, you mentioned it earlier, which was the Bangbu pool system. And I do have to say, I'm glad that they made the decision post beta to make that a free to play system where they are not making you use paid resource or premium resource in order to get access to them.
Yeah, whales aren't gonna get a huge advantage on those particular banners because yeah, it's just all in-game stuff that you earn. It's not you can't buy that currency, I believe.
Exactly, and the main reason why is because having played with the Bang Boos, they are enough of a I don't want to say a cornerstone of a team, but they are enough of a buff to a team that having that locked behind premium currency would have
Yeah.
been an auto drop for me. I think I would have
Yeah, then you would have had characters, a weapon banner, and a bang boo ban like that. Oh, yeah,
well,
that would not have been good.
yeah, and you need certain bang like because Bang Boos are locked to elements and certain specific buffs and so forth.
And some
It's
factions, I think, as well. Like there's that
yeah,
whole element. Yeah.
yeah, there's a factional side to it. So, you know, if you're going to run, say, a shock team, not having access to the shock bang boo is going to hurt a lot because you're not going to be able to. It's a big buff. Yeah, so I'm happy that they decided to show us that mercy in that regard. As far as other sort of gameplay comments, I guess before we potentially move over to story and other stuff, I do have to say I you had mentioned that enemies feel very samey, and to a degree I agree with you that typically how you're interacting with the enemies is fairly straightforward. You're either doing basic attack, a skill, or you're dodging and then going into your chain attack combo attack. I will say ranged characters, and especially with the way that the camera is framed in combat, can get very frustrating because if there is a ranged opponent off screen, there are not a lot of indicators to let you know how to dodge. And I find that I end up getting like fighting myself into a corner, forcing enemies back and into a corner or into a wall, and it makes the camera a little bit rough. Again, it's very flashy. I like it. It's a minor thing, but it's a minor thing that I've played enough to run into
Sure.
that I'm getting real sick of ranged enemies. I don't enjoy them. The gameplay system doesn't seem to be designed for you not to be able to see everybody in front of you. Like attacks and off-screen attacks are somewhat of an issue for me. Having covered all that, Dave, do you have any other gameplay comments that you want to make?
Yeah, so I
Okay.
did want to talk about one more gameplay thing because we haven't really touched on it, but it was a big deal in the betas, and they reduced apparently the amount of time we spend with it. But I think we might have some differing takes on this, but
Okay.
we didn't really, haven't really talked too much, and I think you know where I'm going.
Mm-hmm.
Our TV time
Yep.
and the TV screen, mini jumping through TV screens, this, that, and the other. So in the betas, compared to the launch of the game, they have apparently reduced the amount of times that we are in the TV screen exploration phase of the game. And I'll be honest, man, if they reduced it and we're still in the TV screens this much, I would have hated to play this game in beta. If I had played this game in beta, I don't think I would necessarily be playing it or giving it as fair of a chance as I'm giving it. I do not really enjoy the TV screen stuff. The more I've gotten into it, I think my initial impression, I'm like, oh, well, there's some fun puzzles and some fun mechanisms to it, in terms of
Mm-hmm.
pushing certain blocks onto buttons or trying to capture something that moves around and kind of building walls around it type stuff. But one of the most annoying things about this is it feels like every 2 or 3 squares that I move, the mini game, quote unquote, stops because I have to listen to dialogue from characters. It's like I get what I'm doing, just let me do it. And then I've also had issues of it not being responsive. So like I'll click an arrow key to move and it won't actually move, and I'll have to like double tap it again type stuff. So I'm not huge on the TV screen mini games. Like it's okay, but it does wear on me the more dialogue that's involved in those screens. I'd like to get into the combat a bit more quickly.
Mm-hmm.
But Steve, what's been your experience with TV Land, or maybe if you're deeper into the game, does anything that I'm complaining about does it change? Do I have some hope in for the future?
Yes and no, which is an unfortunate answer. It's not the one I wanted to give. So I do think that part of what we're running into is it's early game, and a lot of the functionally, just I guess to clarify what we're talking about when we're talking with the TVs for anyone who didn't catch our stream, is instead of having a like open world exploration or even a simulated universe corridor simulator style system, you instead move your character through what is functionally a grid of TV screens, and different screens in this grid have different effects or different things going on with them. At its core, I actually don't have a problem with the system. I think they do interesting stuff with it later on, turning it into a puzzle game. Other they're fairly flexible with it. I think at its base it's a good system. As far as the complaint about I move two screens and then somebody talks to me, I think that's a story mission issue. I'm not going to say that that's an issue that necessarily gets resolved in the future for
Because
story
I think every time we
missions.
go in there, it's because of a quest or a story, so you're always gonna have that dialogue, I feel. But yeah, go ahead.
Well, because you do get quests to go in and do exploration style events, and the more puzzle based ones, typically they'll give you a basic introduction of like, okay, this is the puzzle, and then they kind of let you go. And I think that's where it's at its best. I agree that they don't interrupt you. I think some of that is early game jank. I would also say that they are not, at least from what I've experienced of it, they aren't necessarily using the idea to its full potential. Again, this is my opinion, but I feel like it could work really well for a almost Zelda style, like old school Zelda, like Legend of Zelda Gold Nintendo cartridge, A Legend of
Ocarina of
Zelda.
Time.
No, older than that. We're talking
I thought you were talking about
NES.
the gold. Oh,
No,
you're
no,
talking about NES. Oh,
NES
yeah, the original Legend of Zelda.
original, where you could do some interesting stuff with that.
It's dangerous to go alone. Take this, that one. That's how far
Yeah.
back
How
I.
far back we're going? Because it's basically the same game system. It's you've got a grid, you've got to move along it, and then interact with things. And as a form of dungeon exploration, I think that there is interesting things you could do with that. There's interesting puzzles you could do with it. I think the big issue is that at least most of what I've run into is there's not a lot of decision points. You're not getting a lot of branching paths. You're not getting a lot of like, okay, if I go here, then I'm getting locked out of there. Like that's where I think it's missing, is that at least very early on you're given tiny maps with tiny decisions, and you're not really let loose to see what that system could potentially do. Now, whether they're going to do that in the future, I don't know. I don't want to build up a system that is going to see its potential squandered. Not that I necessarily think that Hoyoverse is going to do it. I just do think that it seems like the general feedback they're getting from the community is we don't like this, ergo don't focus on it. So I could see them just keeping to the smaller puzzles, the smaller maps, and so forth. Where I'm kind of in the opposite. I'm going like, look, these small maps aren't. I don't want to say the small maps. The fact that they're constantly getting interrupted, that there's not really any major decision points in a lot of these, is the issue more so than the idea at base. Like I think it's a I don't want to say a design problem. I think it's an implementation problem, not a
So would
design
you like to
problem.
see it be more of like a roguelike type? So
Yeah,
if I do a mission, you do that mission, or we may have differing paths to ultimately get to the same conclusion as far as figuring out the puzzle.
yeah, something like that, or again, branching paths where okay, you've got three doors, you've got to make decisions that way. Like I can only go on one of these paths, and even if it's the paths are like the map itself is the same, at least there's some replay value if you do it correctly. Again, it's at the end of the day, the I don't think it's a bad system. I just think that it's half baked, or what they wanted to do with it, I don't think fits well with the action gameplay that is the main hook of the game. Like they sold us action gameplay, and then they're giving us this TV system, which is not that. Like and I agree with you that it's jarring to go from energetic, upbeat combat into 90s retro clone, and there needs to be a better bridge or Pokemon screen transition to help us like get in the mood. I don't know, but I don't think the idea is bad at base. I just think that again, at least as it's been implemented so far, is subpar.
But yeah, so those were my thoughts on gameplay. I mean, we kind of touched on the story a little bit. What did you have any other complaints or any other praises that you wanted to
Well,
talk about?
I do want to touch a little on the story, and the primary thing I want to touch on is I put up the video about my unstructured rant on Pinacone about the how boring a lot of the dialogue was. That it is the basically the shot reverse shot and so on and so forth. And you had even mentioned during the ZZZ playthrough that we did, the first initial Let's Play that we did, what I thought of it. And I think just to kind of bring that up and give my thoughts on that, I think the game does suffer a little bit from it because it does tend to go into the three columns, each character looking at the camera, delivering their lines issue. I'm willing to give it a little bit of leeway because at least usually you're getting some input into it, so you need to pay attention. But I will say the not cutscenes, the sort of comic panel style cutscenes, handle character dialogue and character interactions way better than what we've seen with, say, Honkai, where I think a lot of those interactions would have been two characters standing there talking back and forth, and then an animated cutscene. Whereas with this, they can do more dynamic dialogue, more dynamic exposition, without having to put in the full budget of rendering everything and doing a cutscene. They can do instead these comic panels that I think convey the information better. So I
I was
guess,
gonna say I do like the comic panels as well. To your point, I think those are well implemented in terms of how they do the story, like in like the opening cutscene, or not the cutscene, but the opening panel screen. It was pretty funny. You know, the
mhm,
comic book with I forget his name at the moment, but when he's as if he's been killed, and then he reaches up and grabs the grenade
yeah,
from them, and
Billy.
Billy thing, yeah,
Yep.
Billy the kid. When he reaches up and grabs the grenade, I think that is something that wouldn't it's not going to come across in the shot reverse shot or in the each individual character tri panel that we have in ZZZ. So I do like those. So I concur. But back to your point.
No, 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 you're good. That's basically it. Since I took such a strong stand, I feel like I need to defend myself a little bit going into this, and kind of go, yeah, it is still an issue, but I think there we're seeing forward movement on it. That being said, I guess, Dave, do you have any other complaints and praises?
No, not really. We kind of touched on everything that I have. So
Okay.
it, like I said, there was some good. There was some things I don't love so much. So I'm interested to see, how the game evolves. I think, as we both stated, it's going to stay in both of our rotations. It's going to be something we're logging in and trying out. I will be interested to see kind of what the next characters look like, and learn more about the different factions, and kind of better constructing, or assembling a team of three, as it were. So I guess we could talk about that very briefly in terms of what
Mhm.
we're running right now, based off of what we got on our beginner banner 10 pull. So because they guaranteed, an S character within 30 pulls, I think.
Technically, it was 50 pools, but it was reduced price of 40.
That's right.
So,
It was, yeah. So pretty standard for Hoyoverse in terms of the discount. Spending 8 of the wishes currency. In this, it's like mixtapes or something like
mhm.
that. So they're movie reel looking things. So that was pretty typical. But yeah, so for my pulls, I ended up getting, and I do forget her name, but she is the support electro girl. She's kind of dressed like a maid, floats around, has two bang boo ghost looking things.
Hmm.
So I run her with Anby, who's the main stun electro unit girl that she's in the main story. And then also I run with, I think his name is Anton. He is one of the 4-star units, or excuse me, the A
Mhm.
rank units on the limited banner right now, because he is a shock type character, so he synergizes really well with those two. And so that's the team of three I'm currently running. And then I did get the Electro Bang Boo, as I mentioned earlier, two in my first 10 pulls, so I was able to S1 it, or superimpose one it, whatever you want
Yeah.
to, whatever the terminology is in ZZZ. But Steve, what team are you running, and is it in, unison with who you pulled out of that beginner banner?
So I've actually jumped around a little bit. I got Soldier 11, which is the fire attack character on the banner. She's good. I actually ended up pulling for the ice Bangbu and got that in my first 10 pull, and then I switched over to the fire one. Then eventually I've managed to get that one now. Originally I got the ice one because I'm hoping to try and get the current limited character, but we will see on that one. I haven't even hit the 50-50 on her. But yeah, so mostly it's been Soldier 11. I've brought Bear, Ben Bigger, has been on the team because he is fire as well. And then the third slot has been kind of flex depending on who I needed. I have leveled up the Blue Demon Girl and used her. And then just today, I got the bat wielding fire support girl. So I'm probably going to move to a full fire or a flex fire team that is, two fire characters and then somebody who's flex in order to cover elemental weaknesses. So, yep, that's what I currently.
So you only have Soldier 11 as your only S character. Is that correct in my understanding? Or
Correct,
did you get it?
correct. No,
You get
I've
another?
got
Okay.
none other.
Okay. Yeah, so similar boat as well as far as character goes. Yeah, I'll have to learn more about future and upcoming characters before I kind of decide what I want to do. So I do have to ask because when we played Wuthering Waves,
Hmm.
the character we both got on the beginner banner was the same. It was the dragon kid,
Yeah,
the beast guy.
yeah,
Now, not only was that not fun because we both got the same character, so we didn't really get to talk about each other's experiences. But then the first character story that you unlocked was his, and I was like, oh man, I'm trying out a character I'm already playing as. So in ZZZ, the first character story that you unlock is Soldier 11. So I actually
yeah.
got to play as her in the story, and I did find it to be pretty fun. But you having pulled her on the beginner banner and then having to play her in the beginning, did you have any thoughts or feelings about like, oh man, like I already have this character, similar to what we experienced in Wuthering Waves, where you kind of partial like whatever, or like, man, I actually really like playing her, so this is fun that I get to learn more about her now.
So I'm gonna be honest. I was very neutral on that. I'm kind of neutral on her as a character. She doesn't strike me as having a very strong personality. Having played through the story and so forth, she's very kind of generic in some senses, or at least from what I have seen of her so far. What actually kind of annoyed me more was the first story section, and that story portion where you play as the cat girl because I wanted the cat girl.
Yeah.
And so instead they taunt me by giving me the character that I wanted to pull but wasn't able to. And so it's like, okay, well, I guess I can tide myself over with this. But yeah, so getting the Soldier 11, character story really didn't bother me anything. It's okay, fine. At least I know this character's combos and I kind of know what they do. So I was able to kind of just blow through it and move on with life. Although, and I know we need to move on, but I do want to just drop this last thing and say that one of the praises, I know that we've been very mixed on ZZZ, but I will say it does ooze its own style and in its own tone. That it very much so, I think, hits the notes that it wants to hit in regards to how it looks, how it feels, how it sounds. It's music, it's visual style, etc., etc. It definitely it works. So I do have high hopes for it. But
As you said early on, as you said, I think one of the first things you said was you can definitely see the money,
yeah,
right? Whereas Genshin was kind of, this underground. They had Hoyoverse at the time. Mihoyo hadn't really blown up yet. They had, some success with Honkai Impact the Third, and I think one other project that they maybe had done as well. But then they blew up and were on the map with Genshin. Here we kind of see that even more so. I think. I mean, we saw a little bit with Star Rail, but we see it even more so, like you said, in terms of the production value and the effort that's going into it, and it having its own unique flavor comparatively to Star Rail, comparatively to Genshin, where some people maybe would draw similarities between those two. But speaking of Genshin and Star Rail, we don't want to neglect them this week. So we do have some new events that dropped in Honkai Star Rail. We have a new game mode with the Imaginarium Theater in Genshin, and then something I'm really excited to talk about with the launch of a new character, Jade, in Honkai Star Rail. So let's get into those. So, looking at the new events this week, like I mentioned, we had the Stellar Shimmer event going on in Honkai Star Rail, and then a new game mode, Imaginarium Theater in Genshin. So, I'll start just very briefly touch on Stellar Shimmer as it's similar to an event that was done previously in that it's a combat event where you have these different stages and there's two difficulties. There's the easier difficulty, the default difficulty that is they'll refer to as a dwarf star, and then there's the super giant star, which is kind of the more of the challenging mode of that particular stage. And then each stage has its own gimmick. So like the first one that we do, is involved around. It's called a Vanguard Breaker because it involves a gimmick about breaking an enemy target's weaknesses. They give you trial characters that are based around breaking. So they give you like Firefly and then Harmony Traveler type thing. And then you have, as the days go on, because this is in typical Hoyoverse fashion, each stage is released not all at once, but over the course of several days, you'll get a new one with, each one going in accordance. But then, like, we'll have another stage that's based off of different trial characters. So, like, the next one you did, I just mentioned Firefly and Harmony Traveler. The second one, they gave you Acheron and Silverwolf as trial characters. and it's based off of like throwing as many debuffs on enemies that all share an HP pool, and they, I guess, take more damage the more debuffs they have on them. I guess so. Again, it's very similar to something that they've done in the past. I've done a few of the easier challenges. I tried some of the harder ones using the trial characters that they have in place of characters that I don't have, right, in order to work with the gimmick of that particular stage.
Hmm.
And those challenge stages, yeah, it is a little bit more challenging because I wasn't even necessarily getting an S ranking in those challenge stages, despite using the trial characters that you're given. So something to try and go on for. It's got another 2 weeks or so, 2-ish weeks left in this event to get it done. But that's what's going on in Star Rail. And then for the Imaginarium Theater, a brand new gameplay mode in Genshin, I want to throw this over to Steve. So what you got for us there?
Mostly disappointment is what I've got for you. So, as you mentioned, it is the new end game mode that they have added. It follows the rough schedule as the Abyss. I think it's 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks, something like that. And the way the mode works is it's supposed to be a semi roguelike mode where you have to create a selection of units, roughly 18 units. The game will give you, I believe, six of them, around six of them, for free. Like you don't have to have already pulled those units. They'll give you six of them, and they all have to be of a certain element type. So I believe the current cycle is Pyro, Electro, and Animo, and you have to build teams given a random selection from the 18 characters that you've chosen, and you can only use each character twice because they have a limited
Hmm.
number of energy. So if you use a character once, you can then only use it again one more time, and you have to clear, I believe, 9 stages or 6 stages, something like that. So there is quite a bit of work that
Already
goes into
reshuffling there.
reshuffle.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna be honest, I don't like it. I strongly dislike the mode. I know it's the new in-game mode. I know that it's something that we've been begging them to give us, but unfortunately the monkey's paw curled, and what we got was something that I don't think has anybody, or I've not heard many people very excited for it. As someone who plays roguelites quite a bit, at least for me, I feel like it doesn't work well because it takes so much control out of your hands. You don't have the option of setting up your own team and kind of running through it and seeing the building and power and the sort of spur decision making in order to figure out what would best improve your chances of completing the run. A lot of it is, well, do you happen to have built units that can play in this mode? And if you do, are they going to be useful? Because, as an example, Pyro is very attacker heavy, like on field carry heavy. They have like two characters that are support characters, and I think everybody can name them. It's going to be Bennett and Guoba. Those two are really the only support, quote unquote, Pyro characters. Electro is not well known for having lots of support characters. You kind of have Fischl, you kind of have a couple that can sit there and help out people, but they also don't tend to be universal. You're they tend to work within their own teams, and being forced to kind of throw together these cobbled teams of, okay, I've got, Hu Tao and Raiden on a team with Jean because she's the only healer that I've got, and I guess I have to throw in Sayu because, the hedgehog girl, she's not actually a hedgehog, but she does the sonic spin.
Right. It's the sleeping
Yeah,
ninja,
yeah,
yeah, and the
Sleepy
Sonic.
Ninja. I'm throwing her in there because I got nothing else. That style of gameplay where it's like work with what we've given you, and what we've given you is a dog's breakfast is not appealing. I don't enjoy the mode. It has some base flaws. I think maybe in the future if they do some tweaks, I might be willing to come back to it. But I'm gonna be honest, it's not even worth the primo gems for me to play. Like I got halfway through the first playthrough of it and went, this is absolute garbage. This is a pain in the butt to play. This is absolutely awful. I'm done. Like, I'm sorry, but you can't randomize a team in a game where you pay money for characters to put on teams. Like, that's a non-starter for me. So I apologize for being so negative about the new shiny end game that we're getting. That I wanted a roguelite system. I begged them that for something for years, and unfortunately, for whatever reason, they refused to give us the one thing that we want, which is that single event way back from Inazuma, which was just fight through this dungeon with a Genshin team that you put together. I don't know why they refuse to do that. I don't. They've already got the code. I imagine it would be fairly straightforward to implement, but they refuse to do it, and it's the only thing I want. So, yeah.
Well, I unfortunately I can't provide any counterpoint or anything because I have not been able to try that due to my aforementioned circumstances. I think I've unlocked the game mode. Similar to you, I did see that, oh, I can only use a character up to 2 times. And I'm just like, I would like to use the characters that I have and that I enjoy playing, please, as many times as I want. But I haven't actually dove in to give it a go. So the other big stuff that to talk about that I mentioned was the release of Jade, a new character that I know I was very excited to get my hands on and try out. Somebody that we'd been introduced to in the storyline a few patches ago and then got more screen time as the story progressed with this most recent patch, and just somebody I was immediately just like attracted to as far as the how she plays in with the story and kind of the intrigue mystery around her character aesthetic, basically the color scheme, everything about it to me just I really enjoyed. And then we get to learn more about her kit and how to build her and what teams we are. So I want to get into the nitty gritty of that and
Okay.
talk a little bit of the numbers and stuff. So we're going to be looking at Jade. So she is going to be a quantum erudition character, and she is going to be big on the follow up attacks. So she's going to be part of your follow up attack team, and we're going to get into more of the team compositions in a minute. But as far as building her, I'll just say from the outset, she is going to be a pure fiction monster. Like that is going to be the game mode that she shines in the most. She'll be, okay in other ones. She'll perform better when there are 3 or more targets. She's going to perform better when there's wave after wave of units, which that is pure fiction. That's the definition of what the pure fiction game mode is, right? Must have waves, must have 3 or more monsters on the screen type thing. So again, usable in other content, but I'm going to be focused on talking about using her in a pure fiction context, excuse me, because that's going to be where she shines the most. So in terms of the relic sets, as is pretty typical with a quantum character, the first go-to that you think of is going to be Genius of Brilliant Stars, which is going to be true to a point. So if the enemies that you are facing, if they are weak to quantum, this is going to be the best set. But when you do not have a quantum weak enemy, then the next thing you're going to go to is very obviously going to be the follow-up set, which is the Ash Blazing Grand Duke set. So this is going to be only a minor drop down in terms of the numbers that I've seen and the tables that some folks have put together. That's maybe a 1% drop off if you're using this set versus the Genius of Brilliant Stars, that quantum set versus quantum weak characters. For context and continue this out, if you're using Genius of Brilliant Stars and you're fighting somebody that is not weak to quantum, it's actually going to be about 4 to 5% less damage than the Ash Blazing Grand Duke. And I know I'm losing all the people that don't really care about numbers, but for those that like to min max, that's going to be what you're looking at. So again, quantum weak enemy, use that quantum set. If they're not quantum weak, you're going to want that Ash Blazing Grand Duke, the follow up set. And then if you do decide to stick with the quantum set and you're facing not quantum weak enemies, you're looking at about a 4 or 5% DPS decrease than the follow-up set. Okay. Now, as far as our planetary sets, you're going to be looking at one of the newer planetary sets, the Duran Dynasty of the Running Wolves, which is kind of that best catch-all with follow-up units now, whereas before I think Glamoth was the rage like a few sets back for like any attacking type character. We've seen Duran now. This is going to be the follow-up set with this this new mechanic. So when allies use follow-up attacks, the wearer receives 1 stack of merit, stacking up to 5 times. Every stack of merit increases the damage dealt by the follow-up attack, the wearer's follow-up attacks by 5%. And then when there's 5, additionally, you get 25% increased crit damage, which is big, especially on Jade, because we're going to get so much crit damage stacking just with the way her kit works and everything, which I'm not going to get into the specifics on her kit. We can all read those. I just want to get into how to build her and what you're looking for. Now, if you can't get a good Duran Dynasty of the Running Wolf set, you could also go with the Sigonia, the Unclaimed Desolation set. It's a very slight drop off, less than 1%. And then if you even can't get those, the third best option is going to be the Azuma Ginsei and Takama Divine Realm set. Again, all these are very similar. We're talking less than a percentage point difference in terms of DPS. And then the fourth set, if you don't even have any of those, or perhaps maybe you've pre-farmed this set for other characters, but the Inner Salsado set would be the fourth best option, but maybe that's what you already have readily available in your bag of artifacts, just because you farmed it for other characters as opposed to some of these newer planetary sets that have just been released. In terms of the stats on the pieces of gear, so when you're looking at the body main stat, crit rate or crit damage are going to be what you're gearing towards. I've seen some people make an argument for more crit rate because you're going to get so much crit damage from the Duran set, from her kit and the abilities, the way that she stacks crit damage as time goes on in a fight, as she gets more and more stacks of debt from her debt collector, which again is kind of the gimmick of her kit, making somebody in your party the debt collector and gaining stacks from there. As far as the feat, she actually doesn't need to be that fast because she is a follow-up set. Because she's a follow-up user, her speed, just base speed, is really all you need. She also has a talent, or excuse me, they're not talents, traces in Star Rail. She has a trace that at the start of combat, she will advance forward 50%. So she will be going early on in combat, regardless of what her speed is, just because she passively jumps forward 50% at the start of a combat. So for the feat, we don't need speed. We're just going to be looking at attack percentage for the feat. So pretty straightforward there. And then for the planar sphere, we're looking at quantum damage boost, and then link rope shocker, it's more attack percentage. Substats, you're going to be prioritizing crit rate as the most important, crit damage, attack percentage, and then lastly speed. So pretty straightforward, and I would say probably an easier character to build because you don't need those speed boots, right? It's just finding a crit rate or crit damage body that has acceptable substats. So that's going to be kind of what you're looking at for her. In terms of recommended end game numbers, again, this is just kind of rules of thumbs. These aren't hard things to necessarily, like, you have to have this to be successful. But HP, we're looking at 2,800 HP, defense around 900, attack range somewhere in the 27 to 3,000 range. We're going to want to be hitting a lot of crits, so you're going to want crit rate anywhere from 75 to 100%. If you do have another character in your party that uses the Pioneer Diver of Dead Water set, I think you can sacrifice a little bit more crit rate because I believe that one passively gives crit rate to party members. I don't remember exactly how it works, but just something to bear in mind or look into here. Crit damage, obviously, the more the better, about 100 to 120%. And speed, like I mentioned, base speed is really all you need with her, but otherwise, 134 being the typical threshold for any character that you're speed boosting. But again, her base rate is just all well and good. When we get to light cones, again, obviously her signature light cone is going to be her best light cone for her. And compared to other light cones, for perspective, the next best light cone would actually be Himiko's signature light cone. So those are both 5-star light cones. If you haven't gotten your hands on either of those, the best option for a 4-star light cone is going to be Today is Another Peaceful Day. If you're debating between pulling for more copies of Jade or you're looking for her light cone, put it in perspective. Her signature light cone does about 13 to 14% more damage than the 4-star light cone. The Today is Another Peaceful Day. If you do have Himiko's signature light cone, her Jade's signature light cone is only about 10% more than that. So it's a little bit of a jump between 10 and 14% more damage of her signature light cone versus the free to play or Himiko's option. So just wanted to put that out there for you guys. If you don't have today as another peaceful day, the next best option for her is going to be the Genius's Repose, which is pretty standard as far as being a good option for Erudition characters because it's also good on Himiko, it's also good on Herta. Then you also, after that, have the Eternal Calculus, which is the SSR light cone, which is obtainable through Herta's store, so very farmable, but that is going to be in this list the fifth best option, but technically it is the third best free to play option because it's farmable in Herta's store just from doing Simulated Universe. You may already even have it S5 just because you've been doing Simulated Universe, every week, presumably, right? So those are going to be the light cones you're looking at from there. As far as synergies, team comps, again, focused on pure fiction. Probably one of the best teams. We don't have MOC data like we did when we talked about Rune May the other week. So this is going to be just kind of what people have put together based off of the content creator server and test realm stuff. Pure fiction, Robin, Herta, and Jade are going to be the crux of that follow-up team. And then presumably you would throw in a sustainer type. You can replace Herta with Himiko. You can replace Robin with Rune May. So there's some flexibility there as well. But having Jade with Herta, I think my team's probably going to look like Jade, Herta, Himiko, and then Fu Xuan for that sustain. If you're going to be looking for other alternative synergies, Blade and Jade, and then a sustain, and then Bronya. Because as I've mentioned in previous weeks, when you're using Blade, Bronya is actually better than Sparkle for Blade. So that team looks like, again, Jade, Blade, Bronya, and then a sustain character. So that's going to be Jade in a nutshell. I'm excited to try her out. I haven't gotten to yet. I just pulled for her today, my first day back with Power. I've got her to 80. I've got her light cones. I've got a decent follow-up set on her. I just need to 10 out of 10 her talents. Currently, I think I'm able to get her to like 6 out of 6, but I'm still excited to try her out. Herta and Himiko are ready to go, and I'll be using Fu Xuan, who of course has been ready to go as well. So we're excited about Jade. Steve, you got anything else for Jade or any insights, any thoughts on her from what your initial impressions were?
I'm jealous. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to skip her because I've got other characters further down the pipe that I'm interested in. I would also mention you earlier brought up the going for Jade's E1 versus Light Cone, and one thing it is worth mentioning is that her E1 does allow Jade to kind of handle content outside of pure fiction where there are less than 3 targets on the field. It basically guarantees that she will always get 3 stacks every time her deck collector does the attack. So that is something worth considering that, at least in my personal opinion, obviously we're not here to tell you how to spend money. Please don't spend money. But if you are looking between the two, I personally would say going for the Eidolon is more valuable than the light cone, but that is a personal opinion. So,
Yeah, and to your point, I'll go ahead and pull that up and just read that off for those that are curious. The E1, the first Eidolon there, the follow-up attack damage from Jade's talent increases by 32% after the deck collector character attacks, and the number of enemy targets hit is either 1 or 2. Jade will additionally gain, 1 or 2 points of the charge depending on the unit. So if there's 2, then she'll gain, I think, 1, and if there's 1 enemy, then she'll gain 2. So like Steve mentioned, it enables her in game modes outside of pure fiction when maybe you are just dealing with a big boss tanky type, or it's maybe just like one enemy plus an ad or something like that.
yeah.
Yeah. So just for those that were curious about that, like I said, diving into the minutia of it all. But that's going to kind of cover the Star Rail, news and Genshin news. Again, I'm excited to try her out and really give Pure Fiction a good go this rotation and see what's going on. So stepping outside of Hoyoverse, I did want to talk about some other gotcha news, games that we're playing and news in those. Obviously, with it being summertime, that means summer events. And Nikkei, Goddess of Victory, is currently in the middle of their summer event. And they just, this past week, started part 2 of that. So with part 1 came out with the summer event, which we've talked about previously, with a lot of battle passes with skins behind them, a free skin that's linked to a Dave the Diver collaboration minigame, which is just Dave the Diver, but with a Nikke theme thrown on it, which is actually I found to be more enjoyable kind of the more I've played it. But the summer event itself is a fully voice acted story event. You know, they have this whole map that you can explore with fishing mini games. That's kind of like a Dance Dance Revolution. When we've jokingly, I think, referred to it as Fish Revolution, in terms of how to catch fish and other little mini games, things like that, and of course catchy tunes. But with summer events comes summer units, which I'd mentioned when they did the live stream. They showed off that we were getting Sakura and Rosanna were getting summer skins and summer unit types, right? Alternate units. But now we have information on what their kits are and what they are. So in order of what they released, Sakura Bloom in summer, she is a burst 3 attacker class, uses an assault rifle and is of the wind element. She is another Tetra unit, which I know has been a joke in the Nikke community with how many Tetra units we're getting compared to Elysian is, you know, at the bottom of the barrel in terms of how many units they get. And then Missilus is kind of the middle one in terms of how many units we've gotten there. But anyway, she is, yeah, like I said, a burst 3 with the wind element and assault rifle. And I think we have about 2 weeks left on her banner. And then recently released would be Rosanna Chic Ocean, again an SSR character. She is a burst 2 character, and she is a supporter class, also wielding with an assault rifle and of the wind element, and again part of the Tetra faction. So there is some synergy between the two units and their kits if they're partied together. They are going to be pretty niche from what I'm reading on their kits. I won't go into full detail because I know a lot of folks here, maybe they don't play this game, but for those that do, there's going to be some synergy. They are going to have some niche uses, specifically coming with the solo raid that just started, which is the Golden Kraken. So you're going to need some wind code Nikkes to kind of break through some of the gimmicks in this particular solo raid, and so there may be some there. If you're not interested in the meta at all, probably definitely some waifu materials. They will be, if you can get a total of 4 copies, so the original and 3 copies of them. They are definitely some great lobby material if you are interested in that aspect. But that's going to be Nikke's summer event that's going on right now, and kind of along those topics, I mean, that kind of a little teaser for what we want to talk about next week. But as far as this week, we do want to thank you guys for joining us. Let us know down below what were your initial impressions on ZZZ, maybe where you stand with the game now that it's been out for, you know, a little over a week, and kind of where you are on that. Maybe who was the character that you got on your beginner banner? Have you pulled for anybody on the limited banner that's out now, or are you saving up for maybe some? If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to leave a comment, like, follow, and subscribe to the channel. You can always email us, of course, at brohoyopod@gmail.com with questions or suggestions for the show or any topics you'd like to see us talk about. We have the link to the Discord down below in the description, so you can be sure to join us over there, where we post up news, have game nights, and content notifications for when we post up on our YouTube channel here. Join us next week, like I mentioned, little teaser there when we discuss summer events in different gacha games and kind of how, you know, how we feel about those, or maybe even some winter events as well. But until then, keep gaming.
We made a choice, go fight against your fate.